Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CLI-ALPMA Innovation and Legaltech Week 2021 on-demand program. I'm Terri Mottershead. I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law, and I'm joined today by SJ Price, who is the lead lawyer at Chevron Australia, Melissa Scott, who is Senior Legal Counsel at Megaport, and Colin Levy, who is Legal Counsel at Lookout. In this session, we're going to be discussing the changing role of in-house counsel and its impact on legal practice. And what an amazing and topical thing for us to be talking about in an Innovation and Legal Tech Week. So first and foremost, welcome everybody. Great to see you. I'm going to kick this off immediately by asking each of our guests today to talk about how they came to their role of in-house counsel. And SJ, you're the lucky one to start us off. So again, welcome, lovely to have you. And how did you become in-house counsel?
Thanks, Terri. I'm delighted to be here. So my story about in-house counsel is really just serendipitous. So my husband and I went to London because he had to do some extra study, and we were staying in a National Health Service, an NHS flat near Waterloo. And I could see the Shell building from our flat. And I thought, wow, if I could get a job at Shell, walk to work and I wouldn't have to catch the tube. So that was actually the motivation. But look, having said that, the thing I absolutely love about in-house is that you get to see how your legal advice plays out in the real world. And that has been very satisfying, and that's why I'm still in-house.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a great story. So Mel, you know, it might be one of those things where can you top that story, but I'll go to you next.
Not quite. I had quite a traditional path to in-house from private practice. I did make the transition fairly junior at about 3 years post-admission experience, which at the time I was advised against doing, but certainly have no regrets. And since then, well, actually, I would mention that the catalyst for that change was that I went on a client secondment when I was in private practice, and I got a taste of the in-house life, and I couldn't go back. I really loved it. It spoke to my, I suppose, my love of working with diverse groups of people, not just lawyers, but all parts of the business. And as SJ said, seeing the bigger picture and the context behind a piece of discrete legal advice and how it's playing out for the business. So with that in mind, I made my way in-house and have since worked across a number of industries, including aviation, infrastructure, financial services, and now find myself in the very dynamic world of tech and cloud computing, working for Megaport, which is a Brisbane-based global tech company, and we're listed on the ASX and recently hit the ASX 200, which was quite the milestone. When I started, it was very startup, trestle tables from Bunnings kind of vibes. So to see that maturity in a startup in the tech space has been, you know, a career-changing, career-defining move.
You know, Mel, I'm feeling that there's a tagline and possibly even a song coming out of that when you go in-house, you never go back.
Yes.
I'm talented to come up with that. You know, I can see it working in a number of different, you know, music genres. So, you know, we'll see how you go with that at the end of the session. So, Colin, tell us about you.
Sure. So thank you very much for being here. It's really fun, and I'm honored to be on this panel. So my path to in-house was a bit of a struggle, admittedly. When I graduated from law school, I knew I wanted to work in-house. I never wanted anything to do with a big law firm. Just was not my thing. I just didn't want that kind of lack of a life, so to speak. You know, so that combined with the fact that I graduated into a bad economy at the tail end of the last Great Recession, not knowing, of course, what would happen years down the line. Yeah. It took me actually 1.5 years to find my first full-time in-house legal role because, you know, when you have no experience and you're trying to move in-house, it could be a bit of an uphill climb. So I had to take on a lot of different temporary roles before landing my first in-house role. But once I did, I loved it. You know, one of my primary drivers in wanting to work in-house is the exposure to the business, being kind of really on the ground, seeing how the business operates and learning, frankly, from the other functions and seeing how they operate and taking your cues as to, you know, concerns that they have that could be perhaps legal in nature, but perhaps broader than that, and applying your knowledge in different contexts is really invigorating and challenging and something I really enjoy.
Fantastic. And look, given your backgrounds and how you came to it, the next question that I want to put to you, I think will draw significantly on that. You've all been in-house counsel now for more than a few years. And I guess looking back on just a few years, and we have to say, particularly the last 12 months, because that has been kind of quite different again. How do you think the role of in-house counsel, your role in particular, has changed? And I guess the other part or the other partner of that is what or who in your business has really been driving that change? And Mel, I wanted to first ask that question of you, if I may.
For sure. I think that the role has most certainly changed in the last few years. I think it's being driven from the top down, from our board and our executive. The part that it plays out, particularly for me, is increased regulation in privacy, data protection, and cybersecurity. And that is a space that typically, you know, 5 years ago, we would have briefed out. That would have been something that external counsel would have had the expertise in, and we would have deferred to them. But the board and the executive, they really are pushing for the in-house legal team to have a pretty thorough understanding ourselves, because these are really, really pertinent issues for our industry, and things are changing really quite rapidly. So when I'm talking about, you know, GDPR, we operate in the EU, and that's a big thing for us. And you know, there's more changes coming. There's privacy shield changes with the EU and the US, which affects us as well. When you're operating on a global basis in the tech space, you know, this is not going away. And it's, you know, if I want to future-proof my career as well, I really need to understand the issues and give quite a decent response to things, rather than just kind of briefing it out because it's all a bit too bespoke. So that's most certainly the number one thing that comes to mind. Of course, the last year we've seen COVID. For us, it's played out in a pretty good way, to be fair. It was kind of, you know, it's a great problem to have, but operating in the space that we do, being able to facilitate our clients as they've all moved to work from home, cloud computing has just ramped up in ways that we probably couldn't have expected. So in some sense, great problem to have, but we've had to do more, more customer contracts and more procurement, more building, and trying to keep up with demand. So great problem to have, but it's certainly something that has increased the workload in the last year. And the budget hasn't increased for headcount necessarily. So then we look to process improvement, and legal tech comes into that too. So that's probably the first two that come to mind.
And hold that thought, because we are going to talk about legal tech, of course.
Sure.
We have to, and we should. But yeah, I mean, as I was listening to you speak, it's almost like you can understand how with business changing so quickly, that it makes a lot of sense to kind of have that legal business partner, you know, on site all the time and able to be tapped on the shoulder all the time. And I guess too, just that input, that ongoing legal input into the decision making or strategizing around things, you know, makes a lot of sense as well. Colin, how have you seen, from your perspective, the role of in-house counsel change again over that same period?
So I agree with Mel that data privacy and privacy in general remains a pretty big concern, regardless of where you work, because data is now becoming a form of gold, essentially. And so many different companies rely upon it for any number of different uses. And while services for those uses are in demand, at the same time, customers are being forced to implement more and more stringent protections upon use of their data and those of their customers and clients. So I do think that that is a big concern and ongoing interest. And certainly there is pressure economically and otherwise on in-house counsel to become more or less experts in that area, regardless of whether they want to be or not. And in addition, I would note that I think the pandemic has in some ways facilitated, I would say, a quicker adoption of certain forms of technologies with the operation of firms, whether they wanted to or not, in terms of collaboration, communication among different parties, exchanging of documents, even reviewing of documents as well, considering you all can't be in the same place at the same time to roam through a box of documents. So I would say that in some ways this pandemic has helped precipitate, I would say, an ongoing trend that has existed within the legal industry of adoption of tech, but it remains to be seen just how far we're willing to go with that adoption now that we're seemingly nearing something akin to a light at the end of the tunnel with regards to the pandemic.
Certainly hope so, Colin. Certainly hope so. And SJ, how have you seen the role change in your legal department world?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. So firstly, I agree with everything that Colin and Mel has said. And the types of things that we are called upon to advise on are very different from when I started in legal practice. And that's actually one of the reasons why being innovative and employing technology is going to be really important to free us lawyers up to learn and to advise on all of these new areas. And Colin, something you said which totally resonates with me, I think the biggest change in terms of technological adoption and innovation within our industry has been COVID. So for all the tragedy and sadness of COVID, one of the things it has delivered is a real uptick in use of technology. I mean, how many people 12 months ago were using Zoom the way we're using it so endemically now? The other thing that I think has really changed as a result of the pandemic is flexible work and remote work. The pandemic has demonstrated that people can be trusted to work from home, to work from remote locations. In fact, everything seems to have continued going, and some of the industries, at least here in Perth, have actually had better results during remote working. So they're the two things that I think have really dramatically changed the practice of law and also the practice of anything really in the last 12 months. Now, with respect to technology, you, Colin, and you, Mel, you're involved in tech companies. I'm not. So this leap into technology is perhaps a little bit more challenging for people like me. But I agree with what you're saying about, data privacy and data use, because with machine learning, that's a type of artificial intelligence, we are using data to get deep insights. We are using data to train systems. So it's really important that we understand, one, what's going on under the hood so that we can give appropriate advice. The other thing that I guess you've both been involved in, but I think is really interesting about how in-house practice is changing, is that unlike private practice, as in-house lawyers, we get a portfolio view and we can actually make risk decisions, not on individual contracts like lawyers, external lawyers have to, but on a portfolio basis. So we can look across a piece of work or a category of work and say, given our limited resources, we are going to put this many resources or remove these resources. We're going to redeploy our resources, legal resources elsewhere. And this is really important. I mean, Mel, as you said, our legal resources in-house are very limited. Our budgets are limited. So we need to make sure that we deploy that expertise to the place best giving value to the business. And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting, because we're all now looking at our processes. We're saying which parts of this process actually really don't need expertise, and which parts of these processes in the legal decision-making process can we actually define and categorize and systematize. And what's interesting about that is you're actually having lawyers who are now thinking quite deeply about how do we make legal decisions? what information do we use? And writing that out in kind of what we call pseudocode, with the intention of systematizing that in technology tools so that our clients can self-service.
Mm.
So it's really aimed at giving legal advice and legal information in a way that delivers a delightful user experience.
I guess you've all touched on that part about how legal tech is kind of, it's shaping the way that you think and therefore the way that you work, to go to your point, I think specifically, SJ, but also who you work with, because you touched on, you know, that kind of move towards self-help. So not getting every single legal problem to come to the legal department, because perhaps there are aspects of that that can be dealt with in a self-help environment in other departments. And also on the way that you really lead and manage your departments, I guess, as well as a big one. Are there other ways that legal tech has impacted your role as in-house counsel? And I guess we touched on use and efficiencies kind of more generally at the start as well. And Colin, I wanted to ask that question of you first, because we know that it's not the holy grail. We know that legal tech is not innovation. There's a lot more than that. But where and how is that being used? Maybe as a catalyst, or actually being used differently now in-house, do you think?
Sure. So there are a lot of different ways in which legal tech can be effective as a tool. And that's the way to view it, really, is as a tool in your toolbox, not as some kind of panacea that's going to solve all of your problems. In fact, it may not even solve one of your problems, but it potentially could. In my experience, one of the key ways in which tech has been used and in some ways effectively is the management of contracts, in terms of not just storage of those contracts, but the whole process itself from start to finish, from getting assigned an agreement to review or draft, to managing the negotiation of that contract, to storage of that contract towards implementing that contract, and then also being reminded of key deadlines and other things relating to that contract, payment terms, if there are particular areas of risk that are out of the norm that you want to keep track of, particularly around liability or indemnification, for example. Legal tech can really help with a lot of those things. We also are at the point now where you have tools assisting with contracts that can help assist with reviewing your standard template, that's been redlined by the other side, and seeing what you typically can agree to and what you can't agree to. And really the whole concept underlying that aspect of legal tech is to automate kind of the boring, the repetitive, the standardizable tasks that otherwise are very time intensive and oftentimes not the best use of your time, which should be on more strategic, higher value work. And reviewing the same types of agreements day in, day out that you see every day is not often the best strategic use of your time or most valuable use of your time. So really tech in that sense can help you bring more value to your role and bring more value to the legal department as a whole. And there are other areas as well which legal tech can be used. If you're in litigation, there's tools out there that can now assist with predicting the outcome of cases, depending on what your case is, what judge it's going before, and these tech tools can look at all the data for that particular type of case that's gone through the system and gone before that particular judge or court, and can tell you, all right, well, based on these facts and based on history, here's the likelihood of this succeeding, which then can help dictate your litigation strategy and what you want to do going forward, which can be very valuable to clients and can frankly save them a lot of money as well.
Mel, I wanted to get your thoughts about this, but the other thing that I wanted to ask you is this. You're kind of embedded in Techland, so to speak, and I'm wondering if, in addition to the sorts of things that SJ and Colin have already touched on, what being embedded in Techland has done to the way that perhaps you think and you approach things, and SJ's also kind of touched on that as well. In other words, perhaps different ways of thinking from another industry, that you're within that industry, but now employing it, if you like, as a lawyer in legal. So I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. It's a real dynamic for me working in a company that started off and remains as a real disruptor in the industry. We're kind of shaking up traditional telecommunications in a very niche area, but in a way that tends to attract people who are pretty keen to do things differently and always asking, how can we do it better? Why are we doing it this way? You know, to say it's the way it's always been done is just not an option for me. And in fact, the company's, 5 years old, so it doesn't stand up because we're young and we're agile. We are able to create a lot of things from scratch and put in place ways of doing things that aren't, I suppose, legacy issues. So for me, when I'm working with my internal clients and they're coming from that point of view, I can't serve them up legal advice that is just pages and pages of my brilliant reasoning and diatribe and expect that that's going to be useful. It absolutely won't. I need to work in a way that is very quick and very much succinct. So almost like a tweet. and of course my reasoning is there and I may attach it as an appendix. No one will ever look at it, but that's okay. It's there. But they really just want a, yes, you can do it if you do this, this, and this. And I'm always try to go with that approach rather than, no, you just can't do it. That just doesn't fly. Yes, you can. Be aware of this. Do X, Y, and Z to mitigate. So it also extends to who we bring in as external counsel and external vendors. If they're not operating in a way that seems to be innovative and has a point of difference, it doesn't seem to work very well when I introduce them to our internal clients. So it's a mindset of some of the people that we work with, and it's also the tools that they have available. The example I give is a fantastic startup IP platform that we're migrating our services over to from a traditional law firm to this model, because they have a absolutely awesome user interface, their platform, which I can log on to, anyone in our marketing team can log on to. They can see the portfolio, they can do quick searches, they can do a desktop search of other, similar trademarks, the kind of thing we would normally have to wait a few days and pay a few $1,000s for. So to have access to our information and to have my clients have access to that information is pure gold, and something that my clients expect of me, and then I kind of expect of my vendors. So it's a very real dynamic for us.
Which is a perfect segue into the next question that I wanted to ask, which is that changing relationship with outside counsel. As I've been listening to all of you, you're speaking to capabilities that, if we think about a lot of law firms, and if we think particularly of a traditional law firm, those capabilities may not be there at all, and certainly not to the extent that, for example, you've just explained, Mel. And so I'm wondering if, as you folks are, as your roles are evolving and your own place within your organisations are changing, whether what's developing also is kind of, I'm going to call it a gap and not a chasm at this point in time, in capabilities that are particularly most relevant to your business with you versus the outside counsel that you may brief. And already, Mel, you've alluded to the fact that there's now certain kind of points that you need in terms of being able to do that outside brief. But SJ, I wanted to, if I may, direct that question to you. Is there that kind of gap growing, and does that lead to an inevitability that you will want to be retaining more work internally, because in a way you'll have to?
That's a really good question, Terri. So I think to start off with, when external counsel are briefing, when in-house lawyers are briefing external counsel, we now know there's tech that can do some of these things, even if we don't have it in-house. And we're going to be asking the question, what tech are you using to do that? And I have actually asked that once and got the response, oh, we get articled clerks to do this. So while I think that right now tech is arguably a competitive advantage for external lawyers, I think in the future it's just going to be part of what you need to do to play the game. And in fact, if you're not adopting tech, you're just not going to be in the game. I'd like to also pick up on something that Colin said. I also consider that in the future, it will be bad practice not to use tech. And Colin, you mentioned some of the technologies that enable wise decisions to be made or informed decisions on litigation. I think that's going to become more and more prevalent. And look, from my own perspective, I think I probably really enjoy working where Mel's working, because she's working with people who are like, change, you know, let's challenge the paradigm. Yeah. Or maybe you're so young that your company's so young that there really is no paradigm. I love that. And I think that there can be a real synergy between in-house counsel and external lawyers who are really interested in challenging the paradigm, right? In thinking about, let's get our legal work up to a high level. Anything that we don't need to do or we can automate or systematize, let's do that. And let's partner in doing that. And I like to believe that the future is going to involve more partnering on those sorts of things that really aren't a competitive advantage, that just are the baseline to give good legal information. And I think that's really possible. I'm pretty excited about that.
And if everyone is at that base level, the leveling of the playing field, so to speak, the collaboration part of it probably then turns almost to a customization, doesn't it? Because you've got the same baseline. So when you're then working with outside counsel or others, you're looking to customize with what they may have, whatever the case may be. Yeah. And I think the other point that you made, SJ, which I think is one we're going to see come more and more to the forefront, you know, around the use of technology and particularly the use of data, there's going to need to be within lawyers a skill set around, you know, almost like forensic investigation as far as data is concerned, right? Because if it's being used to make decisions, you want to make sure, for example, the data is not biased, and you've got to understand it enough to ask those questions. So there's another whole realm of capability for us to be able to jump into. But Mel, I wanted to pick up on a point that you made as well, and that I'm going to express it slightly differently, but I'd love to just get your thoughts a little bit more on this, is, you know, in terms of choosing your outside counsel, how important is it to kind of match those cultures and processes and systems? And you know, you spoke about the tech in particular as well, in terms of them being a service provider. I think you mentioned that was something that factored quite heavily into your thoughts. But do you think that that is a broadly held belief, like beyond you and your legal department in the tech world?
Oh, it's a great question. I don't think so as much. I think it's pretty high up for us, but in previous roles that have been much more stable and longer term companies, different risk position, it would come to expertise and sometimes even the brand name. Particular board of directors really like to know certain things are being done by a certain brand name, and that's completely okay. So cost, of course, is always going to kind of be that factor. But for us, you know, if we look at it differently and are willing to take a risk on some of the, you know, the legal startups that are in our ecosystem even, we are going to absolutely see cost savings there. But what we take, I suppose, a benefit from that side, we are taking a risk on longevity and some of that reputation, which can be important to certain executives, and particularly for certain matters, higher end bits and pieces. So yeah, I think it's probably more bespoke to the space that I'm in. And, you know, it's just something that I probably think is actually going to continue to change. I think that business wants to do business with people and businesses that are aligned in value. And we're seeing a huge shift in this space across the world, particularly coming out of the US, I think, where businesses are starting to almost not just stay silent on certain social issues and topics and taking a stance, and perhaps cutting out certain market, but really opening themselves up to ones that are in more of an alignment there with values and ethos. So I think that's certainly an area to watch as well.
So Colin, let me throw to you, since you are in the US. What are your thoughts about that? How important is it in determining your service providers more broadly, but of course outside counsel, to match culture, processes and systems and tech?
So, I think there's a couple of factors that play a role. One is, when you use outside counsel or any outside service provider, you want to have a good relationship like you would with anyone else. So it's really important to ensure that they are operating sort of on the same wavelength that you are in many respects. And that can extend in a lot of different ways. Certainly, I think we've seen a more value-driven behavior among companies, not being afraid to sort of take a stand on issues that otherwise perhaps would have been somewhat controversial, and ensuring that their providers and their vendors are aligned with those values, because customers are paying attention to those sorts of things now. And they certainly want to, be spending money in areas that they know they need, but also that reflect who they are. And I think that also, plays a role with respect to use of outside counsel. When you're using outside counsel, you want, to be able to trust these folks. And that trust, I think, extends to not just knowing that they're going to be there to support, but that they understand your business, they understand what values drive the decisions that are made, and that they're on board with those values. And more attention is certainly being paid to those types of things here in the US. And I've seen this trend kind of really take off, I would say, over the last, I don't know, five years or so. Even before that, there were still some indications of that, certainly in the financial world, and now it's extended to other areas. And I'm not surprised, because there is this sort of movement socially to really kind of express your values, not just in terms of your opinion, but in terms of who you do business with.
Yeah, absolutely. SJ, I wanted to pick up on the service provider aspect of this question that we're considering at the moment, and to kind of look at the legal ecosystem. So you've got a choice, obviously, with different discrete parts of a matter, to go to a law firm, to go to an alternative legal service provider, and Colin touched on some of those sorts of services earlier. I mean, and I guess we often think that when we're talking about legal work, the work that's retained by in-house counsel is just legal work. But I guess we could be retaining, depending on where our capabilities lie, some of the associated or allied work as well, and not even go to an alternative legal service provider. So within your organisation, what's the mix? I mean, how do you work out what you keep in-house and what you decide to brief out to the broader legal ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think probably our approach would be the same as Colin and Mels. It's a matter of expertise or resources. Yeah. So if we don't have the expertise, or we don't have the necessary resources, so if it's a huge amount of work that we just can't do. Now, having said that, we're trying at all times to see what we can do in-house. And that's where innovation and technology can help us, because there's a number of things that are provided by alternative legal service providers that actually could be provided if you can get the technology in-house. And we've certainly aimed to try and get technology in-house. The other thing is that you can actually get technology that's used in places outside of the legal department and redeploy it or repurpose it for legal reasons. And we've certainly done a lot of that. One of the things particularly has been super fun in 2020 last year is we learned to use Power Automate, and we learned to do a number of things ourselves, build our own apps, like build our own contract automation apps, build our own expert systems. So we've got a couple of cool things. One is answer these questions and we'll tell you which model you should be using for procurement, Or who can sign my document, and can my document be signed digitally? So there's a couple of kind of cool examples of how we've done things in-house that alternatively you probably need IT to do them for you, or someone external. And look, just to build on that, one of the really interesting things about building your own systems is that when your company's policy changes or when the law changes, you can go in there as a person who built it and just fix it up straight away. You don't have to lodge a ticket and so on. So it really is real-time application. So that has been very interesting. It's not a panacea for everything, but it certainly has been a great way to get us as lawyers to start thinking about how we think and make decisions. And to build on that, at the moment I'm involved in building something where what I'm trying to figure out is, as a lawyer, what value am I adding to reviewing assignment and assumption deeds? What are the questions that I'd be asking, and to systematize that so that the ones that come to me are really the only the ones that actually need to be reviewed by a lawyer, need that sort of legal input.
But it also speaks to a couple of other things, SJ. I mean, one is, I guess, we very often don't think about the fact that inside an organisation, and particularly inside the legal department, you're doing all of those things that are happening outside your organisation. You know, we kind of think it's happening outside, but not inside. But the other thing it seems to speak to me is that really that expansion of collaboration and who you're collaborating with now within your organisation. I mean, you spoke about your IT department and now how they're really one of your business partners as well, right? I mean, I know that you live in Techland, Mel, so it may almost seem a redundant question to ask you, but do you find the same sort of thing, that if you can build it in-house, you will?
Absolutely. I'm just immersed and surrounded by people who think in a different way. Software engineers over there, IT behind me, project manager to my left. Like, it's my whole world, and the way in which when we are in the office, the way that I communicate is in such a different way. I'm always picking up from these people, which is awesome. And something that also happens is we get to chat about what people are working on, and I think, oh gosh, I could leverage off that. Can I do this? Or vice versa. An example is our software engineers use an Atlassian product called Jira to manage their tickets, their workflow, their Scrum and their Agile processes. And early on in Megaport history, we just thought, why can't we use that for matter management? You know, we can tag people, assign, attach documents, keep it really simple, but absolutely we can. And that has served us for 5 years, and we are now just evolving into a proper contract lifecycle management piece. But it's saved a lot of money over that time, and it's done a pretty great job leveraging off a piece of existing tech that we wouldn't have even known about if we weren't immersed in that space. And
Mel, I've got to tell you, 10 years ago, you wouldn't be using the word Scrum or Agile
true.
in something like this either. So just quite amazing. And Colin, I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well. I mean, how are you seeing all of this play out in the States?
Yeah, so I think, you know, something I've wrote about and spoken about before is something that Mel has just kind of given a great example of, which is kind of using the tech you already have more efficiently and effectively. Because I think that lawyers often think that just because something out there is shiny and new, that's going to be necessarily the best tool that they should use, or going to be better than they already have. However, what I think often goes overlooked is the fact that existing tech you have could be very well effective. I mean, a lot of lawyers, for example, I don't think use Word very effectively, given its plethora of tools and built-in functionality. And quite frankly, I think that, oh, you can just redline. Well, that's certainly great. Well, you can do way more than that. You can format documents. You can automate editing of certain paragraphs and certain pieces of text. So I think making use of existing tech is something that is really important to emphasize. And certainly I think I've seen an increasing trend here in the US, and certainly within the last 12 months, of making better use of internal limited resources before spending money on some outside external tool that will require sort of investment of not just money, but time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have kind of been blown away by the functionality of just Office 365, and I am not on commission for Office 365. Underscore that. But I mean, it really is, you know, there's so much there that we probably don't use. I know I certainly don't use even a fraction of it in reality. But I wanted to just kind of ask this almost as a round robin, but we've touched on the use of data and metrics for a whole bunch of different things. I'm assuming that features quite heavily in terms of managing and monitoring your outside counsel relationships. Is that a fair assumption? Yes, seeing nods. Okay, I'll take that as a yes. In which case, let me move to another question that I want to ask you. We've touched on and spoken the word value a few times, and again, just staying with this with outside counsel. And I want to ask you all this question just kind of briefly. How do you now actually measure the value of outside counsel? Given all of the things that we've been talking about, where do they add value? How do they add value in this world that we've been describing? So Mel, I'll start with you, but I also want to get your thoughts, SJ and Colin, on this one as well.
For sure. I think that the fundamentals are still number one, on time and under budget. That is number one. If you can deliver any project with those two things in mind, it's, you know, everyone's going to be pretty happy. But going beyond that, taking the next step and making a call is just pure gold when I'm getting advice back from external counsel. The legal reasoning will always be sound. It will always be, you know, beautifully presented and formatted, and you can see that there's been thought and there's footnotes and it's all there. It's everything that I would expect to see. Amazing. What I really want is that last paragraph. And I want the last paragraph to be up the front, and it's too long, didn't read, do this, and make a couple of suggestions for us with everything in mind. Here is the suggested or the recommended approach. Knowing what we know about your business and your risk appetite, your strategies for the next financial year, we recommend this. You know, if you can't even quite let yourself distill it to one strong recommendation, at least 2 or 3 concrete steps for next steps that we can cut and paste and send internally to our executive or our internal client, because that's how it works. We'll take the reasoning and we'll distill it and summarize it. We'll translate it for the business folk, and we'll help that dialogue. But so often still external counsel really struggle in making a call, and perhaps you know, there's just an aversion to risk, an aversion to not knowing all the facts. They want to have a whole lot of assumptions set out. And I understand all of that, but I would really encourage those external counsel to step into that fear factor and make a call. At the end of the day, we may not take it. You might not have all the information, but that's where real value is added. And as Colin mentioned, relationships and trust are key, and that it does take time to build that and to understand where you can go with it when you're working with your in-house client. But I think that that's such a key piece of value. And of course, we've spoken about it, the legal tech piece. I'm actively changing service providers because a new provider has an awesome piece of tech, a platform that allows me quick and easy access to our own information, really. And, you know, that's become a real issue. So that's another piece where value can most certainly be added.
Yeah, fantastic. SJ, your thoughts? How do you measure value in terms of outside counsel?
So I think Mel said it very well. What we want is outcomes, and what we want is pragmatic advice. We accept that it's not possible, may not be possible to identify what is the correct legal answer, but the question is, what are the options and what are the risks with those options? So we appreciate outcomes and pragmatic, practical legal advice.
Fantastic. And Colin, we're going to do the 3 of you on this one. What are your thoughts about that value add of outside counsel?
I would say that certainly knowing the business that they are serving and being able to provide information that pertains specifically to that business is helpful. certainly being able to present information in a forward-thinking, innovative way, and have hopefully some form of technology to help make the process or whatever they're suggesting as the best way forward, if there even is a suggestion for a best way forward, more predictable and efficient and easy to use and easy to implement as well. I think that's another part of it is that, you know, oftentimes outside counsel will give you kind of this all great analysis and, you know, a bunch of suggestions as to what to do, but those suggestions can sometimes be difficult to actually put into practice. So if there's a way that they can say, all right, well, here's what we're saying you should do, and here's how we can help you get there, that's really where the value can be.
Yeah.
And I think tech has a role to play in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to move now into asking you questions all about yourselves as change agents, in particular in the industry, and draw together some of the threads that we've already kind of mentioned. And that is, it seems to me that in-house counsel have almost a unique role in being able to change the status quo and change versus influence. I mean, really kind of act in that change agent capacity. And I guess we've seen it, particularly in places like the States, in areas like diversity and inclusion. I guess we've seen it coming out of the UK, the O-shaped lawyer movement, for example, that Dan Kane has been leading there. We're also starting to see it, I think, here in Australia and elsewhere in areas like mental health and wellbeing. And sometimes these things show up in RFPs. You've mentioned already, for example, that you're looking for certain capabilities and incidences of tech. You know, we know that also some RFPs ask about things like how innovative is the firm. So it does show up, I know, in things like that. But I guess looking at it kind of even more broadly, as a group, so in-house counsel generally, Colin, do you think that you are in a unique position of influence or leading change in the legal ecosystem?
So I think the quick answer is yes, in some ways. I'm not going to give a typical "it depends" answer, even though I could easily could. I think that legal departments often are at the forefront of change and leading change because they're sort of in this unique space where they both are a consumer of legal services and also provide legal services. So they kind of see it from both angles. And in addition, given their positioning within a business, and the pressure often exerted upon them to show value and do more with less, they sometimes have little but no choice to be innovative and find ways to do more with less tools, but perhaps by improving processes, improving workflows, and using tech to help automate things that otherwise would use up time that they don't have a whole lot of. So I do think there's that. I also think sometimes departments can be hamstrung a little bit, given that they often are limited in number and often are caught in kind of this nonstop circle of, well, the problem is we have all this stuff to do and don't have time to figure out a way out of this problem. And yet if they actually did spend some time thinking about a way out of that problem, they could solve the problem that they have.
Yeah.
And I've definitely seen that come into play. So that can sometimes inhibit, I would say, the innovativeness and openness of experimentation in departments. But I will say that on the whole, departments often are the ones leading the charge in that space.
So Mel, I'm going to give you a magic wand and I'm going to say, if all things being equal, what would you put at the top of that change agenda in terms of in-house counsel driving that agenda?
Oh my goodness. Look, a whole of business approach includes the legal department, and at the moment our business is really focused on diversity of vendors when it comes to race and to gender specifically. That extends to us. So I need to be asking our external counsel for that kind of detail on who works within the law firm or the provider, and what that workforce looks like and who's getting opportunity. And specifically, I give the example on, tell me how often you've briefed a barrister within the last 12 months on our behalf, and tell me how many of them were female. Tell me how many equity partners you have that are female. Real actual change and commitment to the values that our company also hold dear and really try to put at the forefront. So that diversity is just a part of my business. So it's going to become a part of yours if you want to work with me, which and everybody may not. That's certainly not going to align with everyone on those issues, and that's okay. I think the industry specific, wave the magic wand, the mental health and well-being of our lawyers it's huge for the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
I think the in-house counsel we can be a real change agent here, because we can play a role, whether we like to admit it or not, in some of the stressful situations that our external lawyers find themselves in. If we're not organised, we're not project managing internally, and we drop things last minute and it's due the next morning, at 5 p.m, which reads, please work all night for me, thank you very much. Sometimes that's completely unavoidable, but often I think it absolutely is. And that if you are doing your job well internally and looking out for your colleagues on the other side and really trying to give them the heads up on what's coming down the pipeline, the board meeting's on Friday, I'm going to need this by Thursday at this time, it's Monday AM. Can we get a little bit of an understanding on how that's going to work for you, and having that communication, not just dropping things last minute. I understand it's not always possible, but I do think we have a role to play in the ecosystem. We should take it seriously and be responsible for the well-being of our colleagues as much as we are for ourselves. Absolutely.
And SJ, I wanted to ask that same question of you, how you can be most effective in bringing about change. Is it through the RFPs? Is it through almost setting standards and values yourself that you then make sure that you get your outside counsel to observe? How can in-house counsel be most effective in bringing about that change or those changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if I had the magic wand, I'd want to know the answer.
I'll give it to you. You can have it.
Look, I think the key thing is to have a growth mindset. And with respect to innovation in the new world we're entering into, I think there are three things. People need to have awareness of what's possible. They need to have access to the tools or whatever it is, the resources to do it. And then they need to apply it in the real world. So it's awareness, access, and application. So for awareness, in Chevron, we have a group called TIGLS, which is short for Technology Interest Group Law and Supply Chain.
I love the name. I've got to steal that name and use it somewhere. I don't know where, but I'll find a place.
And TIGLS started with 3 people in Chevron. Now we have over 100, and it's not just lawyers and supply chain people. It's actually tech-interested colleagues from all over the place. And what we do in TIGLS is it's a fast-paced 30 minutes once a month, where we actually have people within our organisation demonstrating what they're doing within our organisation with the tools that already exist within our organisation. So that's what we're doing for awareness. And what we make sure about with TIGLS is that people are on different parts of their journey. So we will have something that might be, a new word technique, and then a session on blockchain or something like that. So we try and cater for wherever people are on their journey. The important thing is we want them to be on the journey. So that was the awareness piece. In terms of access, TIGLS actually helps that too, because there are a lot of things that already exist in our organisations that can be and are being redeployed. And another thing that we found with respect to access is that the backbone of technology can be an inhibitor. If you have technology that constantly crashes, you can't download things, it freezes and so on, that's a problem. So recognising that, I pitched to our IT manager here in Perth and said, hey, let's get an Apple Genius Bar where people can turn up with their laptops and get their problems solved straight up. Well, it didn't get called a Genius Bar, but it's a tech cafe. And you can just turn up with your laptop and there's a human there who fixes things for you. And it gets like 95% 5-star rating. Everyone loves it. So that's the access piece. Now, on the application piece, that is actually the most challenging because that's cultural. And I think that there perhaps is a little barrier between being aware, having access, and then actually applying it, actually getting your hands on the technology. So that's really the cultural part is really the most interesting and I think the most challenging part. So we're still working on that, I have to say. But look, one of the things I did, which I think was very helpful, is when I built this little app called CAM using Power Apps. It's CAM is short for Confidentiality Agreement Maker. And what I did is I demonstrated that. So instead of people say, oh, show CAM, I'm like, no, I'm not going to show CAM. Hey, everyone, here's a link, click on it, answer the 5 questions, and within less than a minute, you'll get your confidentiality agreement back. And I think for some people, that was the first time they'd ever put their hands on or interacted directly. And it was that interaction. And meanwhile, it was quite fun. On one call that I was doing, I was looking at the back end and it was great. I was seeing all these confidentiality agreements just flying out, 50 of them within a minute. I'm thinking, wow, I'm just the most awesome lawyer. 50 confidentiality agreements in less than a minute. So from my perspective as a change agent in innovation, I think they're the 3 keys. But if you have any hints for me on the cultural perspective, the application one, that's the one that I think is the most important. And in anything, including diversity and inclusion, culture is the most important aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Colin, you're coming to us the furthest away. So closing us out is the honour that falls to you. Close us out with your thoughts on the same thing. How can in-house counsel be most effective in bringing about change in our ecosystem, do you think?
So I think it comes from education and it comes from advocacy. Education in the form of informing what you're doing in terms of how you're doing it and why you're doing it. And then advocating in terms of, all right, I can do things better, but here's how we're going to get from where we are now to better. And I think that those 2 things combined can really help directly with the point that CJ was making about culture and how important it is to get the culture right. And that takes time, that takes effort, that takes oftentimes struggling to push something along because human beings don't really love change overall unless they're forced to, such as in the middle of a pandemic. So to really get culture to embrace new things, you have to show rather than tell. And so I really like what CJ was mentioning with respect to kind of building a tool and then saying, hey, just use this tool and you'll get your agreement back. That will show people of how things can be done better rather than just saying, yeah, we can do things better.
Yeah, absolutely. SJ, Mel and Colin, thank you so much for joining us today. Do we have to stop? Can we just kind of keep chatting? It's just been so much fun. I loving this, loving it. But really, really grateful for your time and for all the folks listening to this session. Thank you. And we hoped you enjoyed it. I'm absolutely certain you would have. You'll find SJ, Mel and Colin on LinkedIn and other social media, but do please reach out to them. I know that they're very happy for you to do that and connect with them whenever and wherever you can. If you'd like to receive updates about the work of CLI and ALPMA, then please also be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. And on that note, folks, I am going to close us out. Thank you so much again. It's just been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terri.